Ayo Akinwolere here, and welcome to the Athletic FC podcast. As demonstrated in the Champions League this week, Viktor Gyokeres is European football's in-form striker. So after failing to break through at Brighton, could Gyokeres finally be ready for life in the Premier League? I'm joined by the Athletic's Mark Carey and Liam Tharme for this one, as well as David Novo from the Portuguese publication Record as well. And Mark, you've written about Gyokeres on the Athletic today, fresh from his hat-trick against Manchester City. I feel like I've been hearing about him for a while, but just how impressive is his goal-scoring output right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty bonkers is the only way I can sort of describe it. It's 23 goals in all competitions already. We're only in November, the start of November for Sporting Lisbon this season. 7 goals in just 5 days as well. He bagged 4 goals at the weekend or as last Friday in the Premier Liga. So I wrote about him. I said that he was the most informed striker in European football right now. I think that's fair to say. I think that there's a healthy smattering of penalties in there as well, which is a little bit of a caveat. My usual caveat, as you know me well enough now, Ayo, to not be too sensationalist. I think that he does have a fair amount of penalties in there to inflate numbers a little bit, but it's still brilliant. It's still fantastic. You look at his average goals per 90 minutes in Premier Liga this season. It's 1.6 goals per 90, which is quite frankly ridiculous and quite frankly unsustainable, I think it's fair to say. But his finishing quality, which we'll come on to, is brilliant. It's fantastic. He overperforms against his expected goals, which points to some elite finishing, which is a massive strength of his. But the numbers this season and last season as well were brilliant. And just to sort of add a bit of context to the wider top 7 European leagues, only Harry Kane has matched him so far this season for goal involvement, so goals and assists. That's 17 in total. So I don't think it's outrageous to say that he is Europe's most informed striker right now.
Yeah, David, good to have you again. You're becoming our sporting expert this week. Thanks for joining us again. But, he only moved to Sporting at the start of last season, and he came from Coventry City, and we'll go into that in just a second. But, this is a player that scored 67 goals in 66 games. Has he surpassed the expectations of Sporting fans since he's arrived? But also, this season, he's looked phenomenal. Is he better than last season?
Hello, guys. Thanks for having me. I think we should have a Portuguese podcast version of this all week, for every week to talk about the different players and coach. Now it's a pleasure to be here. Regarding Gyökeres, the thing is, Mark spoke about the numbers. I'm not going to speak about the numbers again, but the numbers are amazing. And the thing is, with when he made the first season, of course, that impact that he had here, we didn't know who Viktor Gyokeres was, a player from the Championship, of course. But the thing is, the first thing that people thought about was the money. He was an expensive player in terms of Portuguese football. At 20 million with 4 million euros of add-ons. So it's the most expensive player from Sporting's history. So when we have that kind of money involved, the first thing that people do, especially the fans or even press pundits, is like, who is this guy? Is he worth it? And of course, he started to score some goals, and then you see, okay, this guy can do things here in Portugal. And the first season was impressive. The amount of goals he scored, assists also, Mark spoke about that, also important. The goal involvements, he scores a lot and he gives assists as well. So and the thing is, when we thought that he was leaving in the summer with the numbers that he had, but then there was, of course, that connection with Ruben Amorim, and the agent said, if Ruben is staying, Viktor is staying, that type of agreements. And Ruben stayed, and Viktor also stayed. But now Ruben is leaving, and that's why Man United links and stuff like that. The thing here in Portugal, before the season starts, was more of the pundit style. Is he good enough to score also in Champions League against the biggest clubs? Of course, if Viktor is able to score against Benfica, Porto, Braga, top teams here in Portugal, Of course, he can score in Champions League matches. Not, of course, against Lille or PSV. Of course, good teams, but of course not top level teams. I think that the statement that people needed, or well, at least if he needed something like that, was against Man City. Of course, I think that all eyes were on him. Just to give you guys an example, I know that it's not the most important thing, but he had like almost 2,000 followers more since the match on Instagram since the match against City. So, like people knew about him. Okay, this guy is scoring a lot of goals in Portugal. Sporting, who is this guy? But that match, that hat trick against City, was like a statement, like top level striker in terms of what he can do here in Portugal, Champions League, and maybe now those who were with some doubts maybe thought, okay, this guy can play at the Premier League.
Yeah, Liam, David makes a really interesting point there, actually, in terms of people knowing about him. I mean, my ears were pricked when obviously there were links to him potentially going to Arsenal last season, so I've just kept a really close eye on his progress. But you've kept a close eye on him since his time in Brighton, and this is not a player necessarily that's had such a straightforward path to, well, where we see him now, is it?
No, it's a great example of non-linear development. He came to Brighton in his late teens from Sweden, and often said he looked like a man playing sort of 21s football. He was really physically developed. It's sort of the strengths you see to his game now, where he can be powerful. He's a really strong runner. He beats defenders for pace when he gets in behind. He can hit the ball really, really hard and still with good accuracy. And I think it's an interesting point now to hear about him and the connection with Ruben Amorim, because it was a different, I suppose, situation with Graham Potter, where stylistically they just weren't really an ideal match. Graham Potter came in after Chris Hughton was sacked at the end of 2018-19, right at the time that Gyokeres was breaking through the 21s. The Brighton 21s got promoted to the PL2 Division 1. And at that point, it was Gyokeres and Aaron Connolly, both sort of fighting for the number 9 spot. Often, Gyokeres actually get boxed out wide on the left as a sort of a right footer, as a winger, because Connolly was just a more rounded striker. And there's a game I remember in the League Cup, I think in 2020, where he played against Portsmouth for the first team. Never played a Premier League game, but played in this. And he just struggled technically, because Graham Potter wanted a number 9 that could drop in, play back to goal, link the play. Never really liked wingers in his system. Ended up with a system that sort of played wing backs, and Leandro Trossard was once a wing back in that. So it was a real shame in that it just didn't quite work. And I think it meant that at the time it was actually probably a smart move for him to have a good couple of loans, in 2 different countries, 2 different leagues, in systems and in styles, Coventry especially, that really, really suited him. Again, another back 3, another team that played really well on transition. So for better or for worse, it just didn't quite line up. But I think there's a real pride at Brighton in that they're able to develop players of a certain quality. You look at the other players from that age group with Gyokeres, Connolly, Rob Sanchez was in that age group, Benjamin White, Leo Ostergaard. So you're talking about lots of players that have gone on to Premier League, sort of Champions League level, and have then been able to adapt and play in sort of different systems under different coaches elsewhere.
Yeah, I think Liam makes a good point there, David, in terms of where he's flourished as a player. Gyokeres' systems that really suit him really well. Obviously, Amorim is now looking to join Manchester United in the Premier League, and Gyokeres is the Champions League leading goal scorer right now. I mean, where he goes next is almost inevitable, but I think what's more important is that system also needs to fit him to get the best out of his style.
Yeah, true. I think that Gyokeres and Sporting were like the perfect match. Ruben, the type of striker that the former striker of Sporting, different type of striker, also with a 3-4-3 system, but not that fast. It's a striker that came from Braga to Sporting, and people in England are like, well, if Ruben buys a player from Braga to Sporting when he joins Sporting, he's going to sign a player from Sporting to United. I don't know if it's like this, but the man has some background on it. So, but it's like it seems the perfect system for him. The way that Sporting plays, and for Viktor, the long balls, especially because Sporting has center backs we are that are really good with his feet. Gonçalo Inácio, the passing ability, also Diomande. Of course, the long balls so that Viktor can run past the defenders and score goals. Also, really strong progressing with the ball, and maybe you saw some Viktor goals progressing with the ball, dribbling 1, 2, 3 players, and then scoring goals. But of course, that was the last season, and this season it seemed like the perfect machine. Sporting, Ruben designed the team, not a perfect team, but a really, really strong team, where, of course, Viktor makes the difference because he scores the goals, he makes the assists. Of course, that makes him the most important player. Again, if he's suitable for Premier League clubs, only playing the same system, I don't think so. I think that he can adapt. I think that Liam spoke about one thing about the Brighton, the chapter, also other clubs in England. I think that maybe Viktor needed this context, needed this 2 seasons here in Portugal, so that he could develop as a player, become a player ready for the Premier League. Maybe he wasn't ready at the time. I know that he was playing at the Championship with Coventry. Maybe he was just one more player playing in the Championship. Of course, maybe he needed this type of context. Of course, we all know that the Portuguese league is, of course, it's not as strong as the Premier League. Of course, so we cannot compare one league with another. Maybe he needed this context where he's the key player. He's like the star player. He's the player that, well, he plays all the matches. Ruben Amorim says that he doesn't like to rest, so he plays like every match, always the 90 minutes. So that's why sometimes he's a little bit tired, because he doesn't know how to play in a different way. He's always running, like it's the pace is amazing. So he doesn't know how to balance things and play calmly when the team is winning. He only knows one way, is running and trying to score and to shoot. So that's the type of football that he loves, and of course he's really good at it. So I think that this step backwards, of course, coming to Portugal from the Championship, where you are so close to the Premier League, of course, maybe he was a step back, but to a bigger club, of course. And maybe, I don't know, it's hard to say things. What if he stayed? But of course, I think the difference is maybe if Viktor stayed in Coventry in the Championship, maybe he could go to the Premier League, but not a top level club. And now with the 2 seasons here in Portugal, I think, of course, he's ready and able to Tottenham, Arsenal, United, who knows, even Newcastle. I don't know. Premier League has a lot of clubs, like the top 6 of it. So maybe he needed this specific environment to develop and to become one of the best strikers in Europe. And now, of course, it's going to be expensive, of course. Maybe 2 years ago, a Premier League club will pay like, 30 million, 20 million for him, even less, I don't know. And now they have to pay 70, 80, 90, 100, I don't know. But now he's like here. And 2 years ago, he was one more. So I think that Sporting was like the best decision he made. And well, it's we have to enjoy it here, because we know that, of course, it's impossible to keep him for one more year. It's this season, and then he will leave for sure.
Yeah. I want to come back to you on my next question, David. Please, Mark. I'm just interested in your thoughts as well. Amorim's leaving. It's clearly a system that caters towards Gyokeres' skill set. Now Amorim is leaving Sporting. Do we think this player will still be as prolific as he has been? And also, why is that system so well suited to him, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, David covered it very, very well. I think that those direct balls to Gyokeres are key to his skill set. I think that sometimes the opposition plays into his hands a little bit too much in playing in a high line. I think I said in the piece as well, you give him space to run into, he will not only expose the space, but he will exploit the weaknesses of the opposition and make sure that he gets a shot away as well. So I think that's one of his main skill sets, running in behind. He loves to run into those channels. He does it on both sides as well. So it's not just like he's a one-trick pony, and if you can maybe block off the left channel, then you can stop him. He goes into both channels and he'll shrug off the defenders really, really well. Again, I use some examples of that, both in the Premier League, but also in the Champions League as well. So it shows that he can do it on different levels. But I think my question as well, if he were to move to a different league, to the Premier League, is against those kind of stubborn defensive blocks and those elite stubborn defensive blocks where they give him a little bit less space to run into those channels, or a little bit less space in the box where he likes to maybe shuffle his feet and get a shot away. Would that maybe be something that there's still question marks over, right? I think that, to David's point, I think that the quality of the Championship isn't too dissimilar to certain teams within the Premier League. Of course, there's the three teams who are elite, looking sort of more towards the bigger European stage, but I think still question marks as to whether or not he can still do that. More because of the way that defenders can stop him. I think his skill set is capable of adapting, but when you've got someone of a certain quality trying to cut out those channel balls and cut out his space, and maybe you think of maybe a back three, you can just man mark him, make sure that you mark him out of the game, which I believe he struggled with at times at Coventry. I still think there's question marks there.
Yeah, David, now Amorim isn't at Sporting. Will he still be as prolific?
A difficult question. It's a lot of question marks here in Portugal regarding the new Sporting. Of course, the team is the same, the players are the same. The next manager is someone that also plays with the same system. The thing is the idea of Sporting, and I think it's a good one to make that soft transition from one coach to another, but it's not Ruben. It's another coach. It's not Ruben. No one is like Ruben nowadays in Portugal. I think, of course, Sporting will play the same style. I think, of course, the new coach would like. I think it's the best thing to do. It's to keep play the same style. Please do the same things. I think it's the best thing he can say to the team. But of course, it's a difficult question to answer. I think that Sporting will play basically the same. Gyokeres, of course, he's going to score a lot of goals until the end of the season. I don't have doubts about that. But of course, it's not the same. Of course, it's not Ruben. It's just that I'm not making comparisons with the new coach. But it's not Ruben. It's not the same connection with the players. At least we don't know yet how it's going to be. So, but I think that he keeps scoring. He will keep scoring until the end of the season. I don't have doubts about that. I think he's going to finish this season with stats better than the last season, especially in Champions League nights. I think that, of course, that Champions League thing also a motivation for him. Then in January, of course, the transfer market thing, the news regarding a possible exit to another club. It will happen, of course. Sporting already said, the president, that he's not leaving in January, but you know how things are. You cannot promise one thing. Yeah, of course, you cannot say he's staying for sure. If a Premier League clubs, I know that the January transfer market, it's a little bit special in terms of big businesses. Well, you have Enzo Fernandes from Benfica to Chelsea, but I think that was like the World Cup effect. I think that Sporting can keep him in January, but of course that month it's a lot of transfer news like every day, especially regarding the Premier League, and not only in the Premier League. I saw some reports associating Viktor with Barcelona, for example, also Napoli last season. So it's not just going to be Premier League clubs. I think it's going to be like Serie A, Liga, Spanish clubs. But I think he's staying until the end of the season, and then, of course, in the summer, it will depend the offers, the money involved. the add-ons, the players involved, and of course that United link. We had information here in Portugal from sources close to Victor that Victor sees United as, of course, not as one of his priorities. That is, of course, it's United, of course, but he feels the club that is unstable, and maybe the information that we have is that he prefers other Premier League clubs, top clubs. But of course, with Ruben there, if Ruben calls, of course, it's in the connection that they have. I think that if United wants to sign Victor, they have, of course, a strong word on it. So it will depend if Ruben wants to sign him or not.
Okay, brilliant stuff. David, I know you're on your holiday, so we'll better let you go and enjoy the sunshine and some nice food, man. You've been working hard this week for us, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. See you next time. Thank you.
Well, joining us now, having worked closely with Viktor Gyokeres during his time at Coventry City, is Coventry's former assistant manager, Adi Viveash. Adi, so good to have you with us. Thank you so much for your time. Now, having worked with Viktor during his time at Coventry, what did you make of his hat-trick against City in the Champions League this week?
Good morning. I thought the start of the game was quite interesting. It looked quite a lot like a few of our games in the Championship, because with City dominating possession, Vic's first few touches, I'm sure he would have preferred them to be a little bit crisper. Sporting turned the ball over. I think he tried to play one cross-field pass, which got cut out, and it seemed to be a little bit like that for Sporting. Probably the intensity of City's press was interesting, but he made the first run when he got through 1v1 and he tried to dink the keeper. He did exactly the same against Vincent Kompany's Burnley in an away game in the Championship. Exactly the same run, clear, nobody near him, and should have gone round the goalie that time. But he kept doing it. I mean, he'll keep making those runs because he started out as a wide left, really, left forward. He loves that drifting run across the back line, which means his runs in behind defenders that are high are always very good. The movement's really good. So the confidence obviously has grown a lot, which it should have with what he's done in Portugal. But yeah, I like the penalties. That's the bit for me, the confidence to go both ways against, arguably the best goal in the world. So it was a great night for him, great night for Sporting, and it was nice to see him do so well on that big stage.
Yeah. Now we've spoken about what kind of striker he is and his style, and you've just alluded to the way he loves to run across that back line as well. And I'm thinking even with Coventry, there was potentially, if not for the playoff defeat, that he could have been playing in the Premier League at some point, right? Were you surprised he went to Sporting and there weren't many firm offers in that respect coming from Premier League teams, or were there in fact?
No, I'm not surprised that he went to Sporting. I would imagine, I don't know for a fact, but I would imagine there was Premier League interest. He had interest from lots of countries and lots of teams. The thing with Vic is he's very individual. So the reason it didn't surprise me, because I think his dad would have been heavily involved. He's a big role model for him. I think he speaks openly about that. And the people that look after him, his agency, obviously advised him very well, because I think it's a very clever move. For Vic, the worry would have been going into the Premier League and being a little bit like he was in that first season with us and at Swansea in the Championship 4 years ago now, is just playing certain minutes off the bench. He wouldn't want to have gone back to that. So the chance to establish himself, also, he's not English, and a lot of people found this strange that he went to another European country. Well, I didn't, because he's from one. So, I think it was a clever choice. And I think there would have been Premier League interest, but I think that this deal was probably sorted quite early, not between the clubs, but as we know, these things happen in football. And I think he probably was aware of Sporting's interest very early, probably when our season really started to kick off in that second half of that year to get to the playoff final. If we'd have gone up, who knows whether he would have stayed, but I think he probably had his heart set on it, and it's turned out to be an outstanding choice for him and also for Sporting.
Yeah, Liam, we've referenced his time at Brighton, and we know of Brighton's recruitment. Often, not many mistakes are made there, sometimes more than often, making players better and then obviously moving on. But would you say that Gyokeres at Brighton was probably one of their dud moves in terms of perhaps timing as much as anything?
No, I think dud move is harsh. I know from sort of speaking to Mark about some sort of loans pathway stuff he's doing that it's really easy to sort of look at this retrospectively and assume that Vic would always turn out to be the player that he is now. But sometimes players need to develop at different rates, develop in different environments, go and play in different leagues, under different systems. There is then the critique of perhaps Graham Potter as a head coach was a little bit dogmatic in the way that he wanted to play, but at the same time actually managed to progress Brighton over a few seasons where Victor then went and played elsewhere. So I think actually part of a good recruitment sort of setup is knowing when to keep a player and when to sell them or when to sort of send them out on loan. So I think obviously Brighton probably be a little bit upset retrospectively that there's a player that's going to go on and you imagine amass quite a bit of money in sort of transfer revenue over a period of time, and of course there's goals and a goal scorer that they didn't have for a few seasons. But no, I think Bloom, based on the spending this summer window, is doing all right. Sort of
Mark, it's not uncommon for players to go to certain clubs and not do well. You think about Mo Salah at Chelsea, then goes to Roma, becomes a bit of a star there, does really well, and obviously comes to the Premier League. It's fair to say that sometimes players just kind of need to find their way in the right system to shine before we actually see them really achieve their full potential.
I think so. I think the example of Salah is quite a pertinent one because it was never about his quality at Chelsea. It was about him getting minutes on the pitch and the people that he was behind. And to the guy's points, it seems like maybe early on in Gyokeres' career, it was the fact that he wasn't getting consistent minutes. And then he obviously got that at Coventry, and now he is the main man at Sporting. So I think that it's about being able to show your quality across a consistent period, which, as I say, he's now got. But I think in general, just the experience of him going away to a different league, having experience of another league, another challenge, another country, another style of football as well, just to make you into a more well-rounded player and trying to problem solve throughout the season with different challenges. He's obviously now got experience in the Europa League and the Champions League. All these things help you to become a more well-rounded player. And if he does come to the Premier League, then all of that experience will stand him in good stead. Same with international football as well. So I think that's definitely the case. I think, again, I can always feel myself being ever so slightly negative when we talk about it, but I do think it's pertinent as well to discuss the Premier League and the competitiveness issue that it has. I think there's a lot of inequality in that league, and we think about where he's moved to, Gyokeres. I think it's not too dissimilar in terms of the quality of some of the opposition to a championship side, and I think that there's some statistical research to show that the teams at the bottom end of the Premier League are not dissimilar from a League One side. So he's bullying a lot of defenders, but again, you think about that move maybe to a top 5 European league, which he's still yet to play in, let alone the Premier League. And I think it is still worth noting that his numbers need to be contextualised in the bracket of the teams that he's playing. I realise I say that then, in the same week that he's played Manchester City and he scored a hat-trick. So, of course, it's not to say that his quality is not of a very, very high level. But, all of those contextual factors coming together, to make him the well-rounded player that he has clearly become. Still only 26 as well. He's about to enter his peak years, or he's currently in his peak years as well. So if anyone were to want to look to buy him, they would get a lot of value for quite some years.
Yeah, Adi, I'm just wondering, in seeing how he's flourished at Sporting, whether or not, Premier League teams should have a bit more faith in shopping in the Championship for some of those players, because the quality is there. There's a certain group of players that are ready to step up to the next level.
Yeah, I agree with the points that were just made about Vic, and there will always be a question mark out, I suppose, until he does go and play in either the Premier League or Serie A or one of the Spanish, league. If he goes to one of those leagues and continues to hit the numbers, then, the argument will obviously grow in a different way for him. Dominic Solanke obviously is somebody I worked with when he was younger, and then his journey obviously was a little bit different, bigger club, goes to Bournemouth, tears up the Championship, goes into the Premier League, and in the first year didn't really hit massive numbers. Top player, always was, just needed opportunity. And then the second year at Bournemouth gets him the move to Spurs. You know, you can talk about numbers and how much Dominic went to Spurs for, and the money that's being quoted that Vic's going to cost. You know, I'm sure that would be brought into question as well in terms of that. But there are some very, very talented players playing the Championship, yes. And it comes down to opportunity, the same as the gentleman we were talking about before. He didn't get the opportunity at Brighton, he got the opportunity at Coventry, and that led him to being where he is now at Sporting. The opportunity to be the number 9, the main man, he's developed that because, as I said, he wasn't a number 9, so he's had to work very hard. He's not a natural finisher for me. I've worked with several that are very natural. He's not, so that's great credit to him for improving that area of his game and certainly hitting the numbers he's hit. But I remember when Erling Haaland was breaking all these numbers before he came to the Premier League and was saying, well, is he going to carry on doing it? And he has. I'm sure that the game the other night against Man City, and no disrespect to the 17-year-old centre-back playing for City, that was always going to be a tough ask for him. But I think Sporting have got Arsenal, haven't they, coming up? So if he goes to the Emirates, plays against Saliba, you know, and that physical specimen in Gabriel, who obviously as good as there is in world football at the moment, you would think, then that will add either a positive or negative to the argument. But there's definitely good enough players in the Championship at the top branch to play in the Premier League, and he was one of those who deserved the opportunity. And if it comes in the future, he'll certainly give it everything he's got, that's for sure.
Yeah, just before you go, I'm just wondering, when we're talking about players getting minutes and needing minutes, was there a moment at Coventry where I guess you just thought, well, it's clicked, we get it now, we see where this lad is going? But also in your time in football, you know, what is that je ne sais quoi perhaps that you see in certain players that you go, do you know what, with a bit more time, this lad's going to make it to the top level?
Yeah, I think it's all different for every player, to be honest, that you work with. They're all different. I think if you make them individual, Vic's big change was the fact that Coventry bought him. You know, he was on loan, he'd been to Swansea, first half of the season, came to Coventry, was on the bench for us a little bit, played in certain games. He scored a couple of big games to keep us in the Championship that first COVID year. But he was bought in the summer. He came back first day of pre-season, and all the coaches, myself, Dennis Lawrence, we could see the difference in him. He just looked a different person, masses, bags of confidence. Had obviously been alluded to by the club that he was going to be the main man. He was going to play 9. We had Matty Godden, who was obviously a top Championship goal scorer at that time, playing extremely well. So there was periods again where he was fighting, but he earned the faith that he got in him. And he just started to terrorise Championship defences. And for 2 years, he just got better and better. He worked very hard. You know, if you leave a high line, I say this all the time, if you defend on the halfway line against someone like Vic, he is going to keep running in behind. He may miss 1 or 2 chances, but he'll make the run 13, 14, 15 times. And for defenders, that's very difficult to deal with. So the power, explosive pace came to the fore. The fact that he liked to drift into wide areas bought him time, bought him space. We worked very hard on him on tighter areas, his back to goal, so he could use that running across the line, if you like. He scored a goal in the Champions League, I'm not sure who against this year, where he bursts across the defenders and right foot curls it in the bottom corner. Those type of movements we worked very hard with him on. He didn't always agree or enjoy lots of work. He wanted to have the space to be able to run into, which I fully understand. Top part of his game. Heading, we tried to improve that with him. He was a really interesting character person to work with because he was so driven. Obviously, I'm a driven coach. I've been fortunate to work with some top players. I used to remind him of that for a giggle. He'd say, well, I'm better than them. So we had a good bit of banter while the time was going on, but it was a very challenging coach-to-player relationship. And I've spoke to him a little bit this week in the build-up to it because of articles and people asking you like this to talk about him. he nicely confirmed to me that he felt it was fair what I was saying about him, which for him is a big praise. But the opportunity to play at the level and to show what he was about, the confidence has always been there. But that running power is definitely geared to Premier League football. The back to goal and some of the things, again, the other night against Man City, I'm sure he still has to keep developing because you're playing against bigger and stronger centre-back in Europe and in the Premier League now. So they won't, I agree with the gentleman again, he won't get that in the Portuguese league all the time. But you can only play against what you're playing against. And I think what he's done in the Champions League so far will certainly have given him even more confidence. He's a really nice lad, very humble, works extremely hard his game, will be out there until you have to drag him in, loves finishing, doesn't really like tight possessions, but he loves finishing. So I'm sure he's got better at rondos or boxes, whatever you call them, in Portugal. But he's got a great talent and he's adding numbers. And I think you have to sit up and take notice when people are scoring and assisting a lot, which is a facet of his game he's developed. And certainly our goal in the playoff final when he picked Gus Hamer out was typical of how he developed in that season as well, into looking for his teammates as well. So love working with him, great talent. And it's a lovely story to see somebody develop a little bit later in a little bit of a different way because everybody's different.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, with that explanation, Adi, you've just raised his price. Bidding war begins. Here we go. Cheers, mate. Honestly, thanks so much for your time. Really lovely, in-depth look at Viktor Gyokeres, his time in Coventry as well. Thanks, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, Liam, I mean, it's so interesting with Gyokeres, you know, sort of taking his time to find, you know, where he needs to be considered as a Premier League player. And it got us thinking about a player right now who's doing really well, actually, Chris Wood. Not many people would have called him to be second in the Premier League charts for top goal scorers this season. But also a player that's been a bit of a journeyman. He's done the rounds. I think it's around 13 clubs or so he's played in English top flight football. Tell us a little bit about him. And, you know, I guess sometimes it just takes a bit of time to find a situation that really clicks for you so you can really thrive.
Yeah, it's another great example of sort of timing and having the right managerial setup around you, I think. So again, Chris Wood's another great example of a late bloomer, even more so than Viktor. I think Chris Wood had 5 different loans. So really went around, you know, when he first sort of got to West Brom, and sort of really settled at that Burnley team. Obviously helped, you know, was flying at Leeds and then got picked up by Burnley. Suited really in the team environment that he was in, a really good sort of crossing team, quite direct team. Didn't press sort of too intensely compared to other sides. And I suppose that is very similar to what we're talking about now in terms of Gyokeres and having the system really sort of built around you. And I think Chris Wood's now interesting, and I did a piece on him that's gone out this morning, as I was sort of fascinated by his movement and the way that for a big guy, he scores a lot of goals in an awful lot of space, a lot of one-touch finishes for his shots generally as well as for his goals, but he gets away from defenders really easily, and I went, that must be hard to do as a big guy where defenders want to get tight to you. And I realised from sort of watching a lot of them back, he takes up these really interesting offside positions a lot in build-up where a lot of other strikers or coaches want their strikers to drop in to link play and to try and be an option. He's not doing that. He stood behind the defenders, and it's once that back line then drops deeper and tries to cover him, then he'll move again and move again. And it's probably that as an example of the sort of movements I think Gyokeres would have to refine. They're the movements that probably aren't naturally his strength. And it was quite an interesting comparison where Wood, I think it was after the Leicester game on Sky Sports when he scored a brace, Gary Neville or Jamie Carragher, I can't remember who it was asking him about being sort of similar to Haaland in that physicality, and he said, actually it's not really part of my game that sort of suits me, that I had to learn to be more like that, not naturally a big guy, well, so naturally a big guy, but not naturally someone that gets on top of people, wants to really be physical and grapple. So it's interesting for players to sort of understand their bodies and the leagues that they're in, and you know the strengths that they've got. So I think for Gyokeres, sort of seeing him in an environment where he maybe has to be a bit more technical, clever in tight spaces, it's the next level of his game, I think, to add.
Yeah, and I guess Chris Wood is also blessed by the fact that he's a bit older and, you're learning that skill. I think what's fascinating with Chris Wood is that there are certain things that he probably isn't good at, speed, for instance, but it's that game intelligence that really makes him a smart striker. I like that. Mark, I guess I want to finish on this with you, really, when it comes to Gyokeres, in the fact that it's very likely that he'll be compared to a couple of other Scandinavian strikers in the Premier League, Haaland, Højlund as well. I probably don't think he's similar to Isak, but in terms of Haaland and Højlund, any comparisons we can see in terms of their style?
So not looks then, not the fact that they are both blonde,
not blonde and yeah, exactly
that. Chiseled gentlemen. No, aside from that, I do think, Liam and I were talking about this morning in terms of the gait, the way that he holds himself when he's running in at full speed. I think that sort of hunched gait that he has is quite similar to Haaland. I think stylistically, as I mentioned before, it's more the case that Gyokeres likes to run those channels and go more into wide areas and pull wide, whereas we know that Haaland, especially for Manchester City, likes to stay more between the width of the goalposts, low volume in his touches, and make sure that he just gets on the end of things, which I suppose you could argue with Gyokeres does sort of do similar in that regard. He runs the channels really well, but he's not one to drop in and your modern day number 9 become a bit more of a false 9, drop in to get involved in build up and things like that. There's parallels there, but I do always find it interesting. I did a piece this time last summer about Rasmus Højlund, and I think that a lot of people were asking him, do you see your game as similar to Haaland? And I always think those comparisons are just a little bit unfair because you are your own player, you are your own person, you have your own style. So I think just because it's a Scandinavian person, it's very tempting to do that, the Scandinavian striker, I should say. But we saw with Højlund as well, everyone was sort of hyping him up. He showed a lot of promise at Atalanta, but he has struggled for various different reasons at Manchester United. So I think sometimes when you're maybe being, as we often are, a bit sensationalist about strikers and saying that they are the next big insert X player here, then I think it has to be met with a bit of caution. And we have had a bit of caution and context to Gyokeres' game in this podcast. So I guess to answer the question overall, I do see some similarities in terms of his physicality, his strength, his gait, as I mentioned, but there are some subtle differences. But the final thing I would say is let's try not to compare him directly, aside from this week because they played each other directly, but let's try not to compare because it's a very risky thing to do.
Well, one missed the penalty and one scored 2, so I'm just saying.
I was going to say, despite Mark saying not to make comparisons, I just want to jump in with the two players I actually think he's most similar to are Darwin Núñez, who of course came out of the Premier League as well, to the Premier League. Very much as that, can be slightly clunky off the left, good sort of powerful finish, great runner, and probably in the Premier League currently, he's got a lot of Rashford in his game. I think really sort of similar, can mix between the 9 and playing off the left, really good in those spaces. So yeah, I think people might profile him because of who he is rather than how he actually plays. But I think there's quite clearly a place. You look at the a lot of the teams now playing with wingers in sort of that inside forward type mould. That he's definitely the profile that I think people will be looking at.
Yeah, don't speak about Rashford because those Manchester United links will always start with those rumours. Come on.
It's not my fault. Don't listen to me.
Gents, honestly, I really appreciate your time today. Mark, Liam and also Adi, who joined us earlier as well. The preview will be with you tomorrow, looking ahead to Liverpool, welcoming Aston Villa to Anfield on Saturday. We'll catch you soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.